Happy New Year! Hi, and welcome to Kodsnack. My name is Fredrik, and in this episode I talk to Noah Falstein about the state of VR of today and tomorrow. Noah is perhaps best known, at least to retro nerds like me, for working at Lucasfilm games on classics like Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, but he has done a lot more since then, including being chief game designer at Google. We talked at the Øredev conference of 2017, where Noah did two talks, one on VR and one on the beginnings of Lucasfilm games. Both and much more are of course linked in the show notes, in your podcast player right now, or at kodsnack.se/241. Enjoy, and if you have any thoughts or questions, please get in touch. Welcome to the podcast, Noah.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
And thank you for the keynote. It was super interesting.
Oh, good.
So that Habitat infomercial, was that the real old thing?
Oh, so that was the actual promotional video that they put together, that we put together to show it. And what I find interesting about that is the whole idea of having a character on the screen controlled by a human.
Yeah.
Nobody had ever experienced that, and when we would try and explain it to them without the video, it was like, I don't understand. So I become a character in the computer, and other people are there. How can they get in there?
This is so abstract.
Oh yeah.
How does it work?
This was, at a point when modems were a brand new thing, and hardly anybody had them in the home. There's a small number of hobbyists. So.
Yeah, I mean, I had never seen it before, but I read about it when MMOs were becoming a label and a thing.
Well, it was never actually released as Habitat. It was released as something called Club Caribe, which was a kind of stripped-down version.
Okay.
And that in itself wasn't very popular, and it came out in Japan on Fujitsu computers as a pretty robust version years later, but very few people outside of Japan, even very few people in Japan saw it. So.
And that was a stripped-down version, you said, sort of.
Well, the version in Japan was more robust. The stripped-down version was because the version that they released in 86, or that we were testing in 86, worked fine on this Quantum Link system, but 5% of the people using it on Quantum Link doubled their server load, because all of Quantum Link before was just chat messages, and it wasn't even that we were sending graphics information, because that was all encoded to use files on the disk. But the very fact that it was a real-time, constant back and forth was so much of a higher load that they realized that if they ever had a significant portion of their users using it, they'd need to double the number of servers they had, and servers were incredibly expensive at the time. So they said, can we do a version that doesn't allow you to do most of the fun stuff so people won't use it so much? And it's like, okay, I guess so.
That's a big problem, being ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
Like, we can't afford this.
Well, which reminds me, it's another one of those things that has stayed the same over time, and that if you look at the QWERTY keyboard on any keyboard, almost everyone knows that one of the interesting things about it is that the letters were sort of jumbled up.
Oh yeah.
But what most people don't know is that there was a marketing gimmick that, aside from jumbling up the letters to slow you down, much like they wanted to do the Quantum Link, when they invented the typewriter, they wanted to be able to describe what it was, so they set it up so you can spell typewriter with all the letters on the top row. And that's so you could say this is a TYPEWRITER and watch people's fingers go and hit those.
It looks...
So, and of course, letters like E and T are some of the most common usage, and they're terrible to have them up there, but that was why they set up with that specific
It's one of those things, it demos well.
Yeah, exactly.
and
then it happens all the time that somebody does something for stupid reasons, and nobody ever fixes it.
Yeah,
so
that's what they said about like the OS X dock as well, that it demos really well, that's why it's there, basically. Yeah, so things haven't changed much in that way, I guess.
Exactly.
But it's funny, Habitat was a virtual world, and we're still talking about VR as something that's up and coming, but now it at least feels closer than ever. I mean, I have a PSVR headset at home, and I mean, my main thing is that I want more support for it.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, we're still looking for the killer apps in VR, and I'm convinced we're actually getting pretty close. That I do think that VR filmmaking is actually a really worthwhile thing, and people are just figuring out the grammar of VR storytelling. And every time there's been a new storytelling medium, people have needed to kind of adjust and figure out what it's good for and how it works. You can learn a lot from filmmaking in particular in terms of how VR, I think, is going to click. But it's also a little bit like games because there's at least a degree of interactivity, I think, that will work. But my guess is that largely non-interactive VR movies will actually be a big deal within the next few years.
Yeah. Do you have a sort of sense of how close people are to figuring out how to do it in a good way?
Well, I think people are already figuring out pieces. The spotlight stories that I mentioned in my keynote, there are some really fun ones besides Pearl, which is very emotional. There's something called Special Delivery that Aardman Studios that did the Wallace and Gromit movies. And they did this almost 2 years ago, and it's really very funny and quite interactive. They have a storyline that you can follow, but if you ever turn your head away, it essentially pauses and lets you explore other little mini stories that are built into the world in 360 around you.
That's a good one. So it's actually interactive.
Yeah, and The Simpsons also did one that was their 600th episode. They did a special little VR spotlight story. Same kind of deal where you can actually find Easter eggs by looking around. That the fourth or fifth time I played The Simpsons one, I happened to think to look up, and up on the ceiling there was a parody of the Sistine Chapel, as a little joke. And I don't know how many other things they hid in there that you just don't notice until you explore the world. So I think people are discovering that. My guess is that there's somebody, maybe even still in film school, maybe a 25-year-old director who is going to be essentially the Spielberg or Lucas of VR, and everyone will say, oh yeah, that thing he did in 2018, that was when everybody started to realize this was
sort of an of course moment.
Exactly.
Because that's a feeling I get. I see some of those other like VR movies you can find at YouTube or something, and it's compared to a proper VR game, well, proper whatever that means. It still feels very flat when you have the comparison of a game, and it's much more depth. But still, I mean, a nice flight over Pyonyang or something, it's not something you can do otherwise, and it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
But do you think interactivity will be a large part of the movie experience as well? Or?
I think that there'll be a whole range. I think VR is interesting because there's a lot of room for the full spectrum, from a completely interactive game experience to a completely non-interactive film experience. But I think the sweet spot for film is maybe 10% of the way in, so a little bit of interactivity, gaze-directed, that I'd love to see, and he may well be working on it, James Cameron's doing sequels to Avatar. That world is so rich and interesting. If they use the same approach that I just mentioned in the Special Delivery, so that, yes, you can follow the main story, but here's what looks like an insect, and it's smelling a flower, and the flower just ate it, and then something came along and ate the flower, and
it keeps going.
I mean, you could build a totally interactive environment, and clearly he's spent a lot of time thinking about how the ecology would work that way. And I would love to spend hours exploring that world.
Oh, yes.
But I'd like to have a real story that keeps me, it's all right, I'm tired of watching things eat each other. This is where the story's happening, and let me get back involved in that. Yeah,
give me the Pixar movies of 2020 or something. It's going to be fantastic.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and the Pixar people, so when I was at Lucasfilm, the games group was part of the computer division, and another part of the computer division was the graphics group, and that was the Pixar people that were bought by Jobs and spun off. But it was really fun because we would support each other, and that they believed in digital filmmaking, and we weren't even sure that was possible, but or at least feasible. But we certainly believed in using computers to do that sort of thing, and they likewise supported us in the game work we were doing. So it was very nice to see their successes as that all took off. But I'd love to see. I'm sure they will be at the forefront of a lot of the interesting work there.
It's sort of their thing. Do you have Do you have like a favorite current VR platform, or something that you feel has come a longer way than the others, or has more promise or something?
That's interesting. Well, what's nice is that there are so many. It's nice from the sense of developers, and then you can kind of pick and choose what works. So, for example, on the games for health stuff, I was impressed with. In a lot of cases, they need a mobile VR platform because the hospitals can't, wheel in a full computer and set it all up, and there's a lot of radio interference, and so I thought Google's Daydream was great for that. Yeah. Except it turns out that because it's bound in fabric, which is really comfortable, it's very hard to sterilize it. So hospitals don't like it that much, and it never would have occurred to me that hard plastic is actually preferable there. So a lot of them are using Gear VR specifically because it's easier to clean, even though it's sort of less comfortable and less easy to use in some ways. And that was interesting to see, but it's an example of sometimes a feature that seems inconsequential will be really important to someone else. I do like, certainly, the Vive in terms of the one system that if you are only going to have one system and you want to sort of see the best stuff, my sense is that they've done a pretty good job of capturing some of the high-end experimental things that way. But the PSVR is great on the other end, and that if you want something that's good, but you don't need to buy a $1,000 computer just to run it, that's a really great alternative. So it kind of depends on your needs, and I hate to predict this. It's a very chaotic thing as to standards, but I would guess that at some point, maybe in 2 years, maybe in 10 years, we'll have something that will be a little bit more like what we've got with the PCs and Macintosh. There might be only one or two or maybe three basic standard systems out there, or two seems to happen a lot with computers and games and stuff. At least two major ones and several wannabes that are trying to make the next generation.
And maybe doing slightly different things as well.
Yeah.
I mean, a platform purely for gaming is a whole different thing than the Vive that you can use to build stuff.
No, absolutely, and that's actually a good point in that maybe I'm underestimating it. Maybe VR is too varied, and maybe augmented reality will also kind of intrude, so that it's really more of a question of, do you want the latest expensive system that does both AR and VR, or do you want a cheaper dedicated VR system that you use, maybe you get that just for sitting, on the couch and watching these VR movies. Yeah,
because that was a prediction. I watched a speech with like 40 predictions for VR, relatively short term, and one of them was that there will be a dedicated VR portable headset, which isn't a phone.
Yeah.
Which is something, it makes sense now that someone says it, but right now it feels like, why wouldn't you use your phone all the time?
Well, that prediction may have been because they're working with companies that are already have those, in production, but haven't announced them yet. So that would be my guess. That's something that certainly you could do with today's technology, no problem.
Yeah. And also, I guess, another area where things might either converge or go totally separate ways might be how you control the experiences and what you use them for.
Yeah, I think controllers, that's another one that certainly hasn't been nailed down. There are some, good ones that both, Oculus and Vive have come up with, but they're not ideal, and a lot of a huge range of experimental controllers, Datagloves, which the term virtual reality goes back to Jaron Lanier, and his first experiments were just a data glove affecting things on the TV screen. And I saw a demo of that in 1984, and maybe it was 85. And that idea of kind of being able to reach into the screen was what got all of us excited at first. Yeah. And it may go full circle and be a standard input device. Yeah. But, the nice thing about controllers is that we always have seen that there's constant experimentation there. So whatever becomes standard, I'm sure there will continue to be different offshoots and new variations on that.
Yeah, and it all depends on what you want to do as well, I suppose. Exactly. I mean, I don't want a big controller for watching a movie. I want to just look around, possibly.
Yeah, and the ones that use, particularly the augmented reality things where the sensors that are sensing the world can also sense gestures, that seems to be the simplest thing, because you do want to have something where you can just put a headset on and it instantly works.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have to put gloves on and connect them and, connect the battery pack. We may have to deal with that at first, but it's going to be much like, looking at an Apple Newton now. It's like, that was not really what we needed to do.
Yeah, and the PSVR, it's just a mess of cables. It feels a bit like the Matrix that way, but it's not what I'm looking for in itself.
No, I mean, I think everybody is aware that, we need to go cableless and
as soon as possible.
Yeah, but that's one of those things that, of course, it is happening, and it may be another 5 or 10 years before the bandwidth and the portability get really good.
Yeah.
But of course, it will. That's not a difficult problem, or at least it's a difficult engineering problem, but it's not a conceptual issue.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Google Shorts, short stories. I guess I should call them. Is there any other experience or short movie or anything like that you think people should try right now to get maybe a better feel for it, or maybe expand our
VR in particular?
Well, the others as well, but
Boy, well, I'm probably not the best person to ask on that, because I worked at Google up until this last April, and at Google I had access to every system out there, so I got a chance to play a lot of different stuff. But for the last 6 months at home, I actually have no VR system, and I've depended on conferences like this to kind of see what's out there and get up to speed, and also to sometimes watch things on video, even though I know I'm not getting the full experience. So I don't know of what the sort of cutting edge best practice would be today, but I'm confident in that. I'm personally kind of waiting for that killer app that everybody is in total agreement. This is finally getting it right. We've got to see this, and maybe that'll be on one. It'll almost certainly be on one specific system, and I'll know that's
it should be.
the first one
Make
to buy.
good use of that particular one.
And that's, of course, what the hardware manufacturers are waiting for too. Because if you need a PSVR to watch this thing everybody wants to see, then they're really happy. And if it's an Oculus, then it's a different set of people who are going to be celebrating.
Yeah. It's I think one of the best whole VR game experiences I had on the PSVR was actually. So it connects back nicely, because it was a game called Polybius, which is made by Jeff Minter.
Oh, okay.
Who's been making games since forever, and it's so much the essence of a Jeff Minter game, and also so much the essence of a VR game. I mean, it's a tunnel shooter.
I'll have to take a look at that.
It's really pure, and you have this sort of trance music.
There's a game came out, I don't know, about 8 or 9 months ago called Virtual Reality that I also enjoyed, and that the conceit there is that you're in a future, and there are, within VR, you see all these little sort of VR headsets, and you reach out, pick it up, and move it to your face, and suddenly you change context, and you can get several layers in, and there's a story that develops. It's very much like Portal, which was one of my favorite games in the last 10 years or so. I guess it is 10 years old now, boy.
Oh, that's weird.
But it has that same feeling where you're in an interesting story, but you start to realize that what they're telling you is not exactly the truth. And, it's fun to see how that evolves. But that's been one of the better ones I've seen that actually kept me interested.
Yeah. So which platform was that on?
That was on Daydream that I saw it, but it might well be on other systems. It was a very simple setup. Anything that runs on mobile VR tends to be ported to the other systems as well.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of nice cross-talking there. It's cool how VR can take an old idea and sort of update it as well. I played a little classic platformer, really, or a platform story called The Lost Bear, which was also on PSVR. And it's really a side-scrolling platforming game with a nice little story and no words. I think no words, and it's sort of this paper cutout feel. But the whole VR thing is that you're sitting and watching a stage play.
Oh,
so
interesting.
The curtains come down if you lose a life and stuff like that. And it's so simple, and it doesn't really need VR, but still it adds something.
Well, but that's the interesting trick, is that I think people are just starting to find some of the elements that VR can do particularly well. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think the easiest one is just fear, and that it's really good at scaring you. And Unfortunately, I don't think we really need that. I mean,
No.
scary games are already as scary as they need to be.
Yeah, I don't need them to be worse.
And in fact, there have been several VR experiences that I've just stopped after just a minute or two because it's way too realistic. But that same engagement of your brain to give you that sense of fear, I think also, as I mentioned in my talk, can give you a sense of intimacy.
Yeah.
And I think that romances and interpersonal stories, the Pearl Spotlight story that I mentioned really does this well, of giving you an emotional connection to the characters simply because you're so close you feel like you could reach out and touch them.
Yeah, and you feel like you actually have eye contact with
Yeah,
people.
and if having characters that are looking at you and responding to you. Now, of course, the interface there can become a little bit difficult, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a whole genre of VR stories that use voice recognition so that you have a character that you actually talk to, and maybe it's a limited vocabulary, maybe you're talking to a child or a robot or who knows what, but gives you some context to understand why you only have a few things you can say. But a friend of mine, Steve Meretzky, made a text adventure, almost 40 years ago, called Planetfall, with a robot named Floyd that sacrifices himself. And to this day, even after all this time, people bring that up as one of the few times that they were moved to tears by a video game. I think VR is going to be able to do that much more reliably and maybe in a similar way.
Yeah, build more connections. But it's difficult. It's exciting to see how people start to find it out as well, which things work and which don't, and what's new. I mean, someone said, I think it might have been the same prediction talk, that there's going to be at least one entirely new, like, VR-focused game genre of some kind. And that makes so much sense. And I don't know either what it might be, but it's...
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that as a developer, I love, and that as an industry, anyway, it was nice for me working in the early 80s, because we were discovering entire new genres, and there was a sense, particularly up until 86, 87 or so, that, who knows, let's try some totally radical different thing. The Sims actually is probably one of the good examples. That, and yet gradually, as with film, the actual new genres became fewer and fewer, and things became more variations on existing themes. But VR definitely opens up the possibility for entirely new types of experiences that way. And I would say probably at least several new genres that may be possible that may not even seem like a new genre at first. All these genres, Doom, or actually I guess it was Castle Wolfenstein, felt like just a really cool game, but first-person shooter became a genre when it was pretty clear that you could do many variations and people would still play them.
But it's all the same controls, basically.
Yeah, and other games have been a single-shot, interesting game, but nobody really has done a whole series of variations on them.
Do you have a particular one in mind there that
let's see.
people should have picked up on?
Well, I liked, for example, Katamari Damacy was really original and fresh, and but it was kind of a one-shot deal. It's not like there's a whole bunch of games about rolling balls.
No, it seems contrived in other.
And I wouldn't. It's hard to. It's kind of an action game, but kind of a platformer, but not really. I mean, so I'm not sure it even deserves to be considered a separate genre. But that's kind of a good. Single example. I'm sure it's a hard one. I'm mostly over my jet lag, but I'm finding whenever I have to try and recall something weird, I'm actually remembering names of like yesterday I was trying to come up with John Williams, the composer for Star Wars, and it was just one of those. I knew his name was John, but I could tell you a whole bunch of things about his work, but I just was missing that last name.
Yeah, it's not clicking right now. It happens. Well, and so
flipping it back to VR, one of the things I find intriguing is the idea that a lot of our memories are based on location, and VR as a memory device might be a really interesting experiment. having things where, for example, I don't know if you've heard about the idea of memory palaces. This is actually an idea that goes back to the ancient Greeks.
For memorizing things,
yes.
like visualizing.
Yeah, but you visualize, your shopping list in different places of a world you've been in or a house you've been in.
Yeah.
Well, what if you could put that house into VR, type in your shopping list, and it populates it. So you don't have to mentally visualize it. You see it in front of you. And then when you go shopping, you can just use that memory. Now, granted, that's a pretty elaborate way to memorize a shopping list, but they use that kind of thing. The memory experts and the people who do competitions use those all the time. And there always are things that we'd love to be able to have, a long list of stuff we'd love to be able to memorize.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if that also becomes a good way to teach languages and grammar in particular, to see, thousands of different things. You go through the virtual house and there are names for everything, and when you need to remember the name for something later, you remember that virtual house and where it was, and my guess is that the name will come to you a lot faster than if it's just page number 27, things you find in a kitchen. That it's just really hard to bring those back.
Exactly.
Otherwise.
And I mean, if you don't remember it, you can probably search for it by the room description or something. Because I remember it was a room with the red curtains. I said, fork.
Exactly. And it's one of the things that's interesting that even now in a world where we've got the phones in our pocket and, Google at command to bring any kind of question that we want, being able to just do that with your own head is still very handy, and without knowing what to look up, you're kind of lost. So the more that you can build into your own software without having to go through the phone or a computer, I think the better off we are.
Yeah. You talked about like science fiction as well, and how things are different distances away from us. AI is always 5 years ahead, or VR is pretty much here.
Yeah. But see, AI, it's one of those. There was this great thing when I was at Google. Google announced, this was just January of last year. I've forgotten exactly even how it might have been this year, that they were going to make an announcement about playing Go.
Oh yeah.
And Zuckerberg or Facebook, apparently, prompted by that, kind of tried to steal the thunder by saying, Facebook has been working on this, so we think it's only 10 years away, and it's great. And then they announced that they had beat the European champion, and then, not long after they beat the world champion, and now it's apparently gotten so much better than that, in such a short time, that one narrow use of AI has just exploded. And a lot of people, Stephen Hawking in particular, it seems, are worried that this means that the computers are going to rise up and take over at any moment. And in my experience, and everybody I know who's working even at the high ends of this, we're still pretty safe from the crazy computers. That it's one thing to get them to play Go, but to get them to open a package, it's almost impossible.
You're stuck. And you can be really good at recognizing some stuff, but no, I'm pretty sure that's a gun. No, it's a tortoise.
Yeah.
No, but the thing I started thinking there is that it feels like so many of those science fiction ideas that I had growing up, they're here or pretty near in some form. Where are the next things? The ones that we have to reach farther for, that really seems like impossible still. Is someone writing sci-fi now about those that I don't know about?
Well, I mean, there's quite a bit out there. I mean, it's easier to use hindsight because then, of course, you know how it turned out. But sometimes science fiction predicts the future. Usually it predicts a possible future, and part of what works is, it's like the original Star Trek TV series inspired a huge number, a lot of scientists at NASA, a lot of people in the games industry, all kind of go back to that as our first thing, and that's interesting that that's one of the IPs that stayed fresh all the way through to today. But it still serves as more of an inspiration in a lot of ways. So, for example, the flip phone and some of the other early technologies, medical devices that could be portable and could scan people, were inspired by that, and people figured out how to build them. Other things like teleportation, obviously, we still don't have. And the holodeck, certainly for the games industry, we're not there yet, but VR is bringing us much closer than we were. And suddenly, some of what the holodeck does that looked ridiculously far in the future, and maybe even Star Trek was being too optimistic to say that by 2400 we can do this, no longer seems all that optimistic.
No.
There was a book, actually a series of books, starting with something called Dream Park by Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle, that talked about using an actual theme park with kind of practical special effects to make you feel like you're in essentially a holodeck, and we may still get that. There's something called the Void that is a VR-based location thing where you actually go there physically, and there's a room that is purpose-built so that you can experience it within VR, but it has stuff that you can feel and touch as you move around. So that's an interesting prediction that is partly driven by science fiction, partly driven by imagination. Yeah. Ready Player One as a movie is about to come out, and that, of course, will inspire people to try a lot of things and is based on, old technology in a new setting. So, we see that. But I think the main thing, most science fiction authors don't believe that they're trying to predict the specific future, just exploring different ideas.
Yeah.
And I love the TV series Black Mirror. When I say I love it, I can only watch like one episode a month because it's so depressing.
Yeah, I've heard everyone say stuff like that.
But it's so good at capturing very thoughtfully some of the dangers in what we're doing. And I wore Google Glass for about a year, and I loved the fact that you could actually take pictures and record short videos literally by blinking your eye. It was a wonderful thing to do. But then I saw a Black Mirror episode of a relationship that falls apart because you have that technology, and it was so plausible. In fact, I had a girlfriend years ago who had an incredibly good memory, and it was very much like what they showed in that episode, that I would say, I didn't say that, and she would repeat back what I had said so word for word that I would actually hear my voice. It's like, oh, yeah, I did say that I would bring that home. I'm sorry, honey. And we broke up pretty quickly, actually. So, yeah, I believe that we have to be cautious because every new advantage, there are disadvantages as well. And as great as cell phones are, we've all learned there are a lot of, maybe questionable areas that they're not so helpful for.
Yeah, there's always something that comes up,
exactly.
And it's worth thinking about. I don't know.
Yeah, I think as developers we need to be responsible. You don't want to be frozen and not try anything because there might be a bad usage. But I use the old adage about how fire is a good servant and a bad master. Mm-hmm. You don't want to give up on using fire, but you don't want to burn yourself either.
No, so. And not burn down your house or someone else's house by accident. No, it's difficult. I think we're running out of time a bit, but it's been really fun. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you. It's been great. My pleasure.
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof and incapable of error.